Sarah had always been my best friend. Since high school, we were inseparable, a duo that shared everything, from the highest highs to the lowest lows. She was the type of person who could walk into a room and light it up without even trying. Her laugh, her energy, her presence, it was magnetic. And me? I was the steady one, the friend she could call on a whim, whether it was to help her pick out an outfit for a date or haul boxes across town for a last-minute move. I never minded being that person for her. It felt natural, like an unspoken part of who we were together. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, there was a part of me I tried to ignore. That part that caught itself lingering too long on the way her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, or the way her laugh could make my worst days seem brighter. I'd shrug it off, telling myself it was nothing, just a friend admiring another friend. That illusion shattered one Saturday night. It started so casually, like any other evening we'd spent together. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, there she was. Sarah, with her carefree smile, a bottle of wine in one hand, and an easy confidence in the way she stood there, framed by the dim light of my porch. "Let's watch something and forget about the rest of the world for a while," she said, her tone light and playful. She didn't wait for an invitation, slipping inside like she always did, the familiarity of her presence filling the room. I didn't know it then, but that night would be the start of something I couldn't have anticipated, something I wouldn't be able to undo. We settled on the couch, wine glasses in hand, the soft glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the room. At first, it was like any other night, her feet tucked under her as she laughed at whatever movie we had picked, while I half paid attention, more focused on the way her smile crinkled the corners of her eyes. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just the wine, the late hour, or my own restless thoughts playing tricks on me. But in those quiet moments, as the movie rolled on and the space between us felt impossibly small, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Looking back, maybe I always knew. Maybe a part of me had been waiting for it all along. The movie droned on in the background, but I wasn't paying attention. My focus had shifted to Sarah, sprawled out comfortably on the couch beside me, her arm occasionally brushing against mine as she adjusted herself. I tried to keep my gaze on the screen, but the warmth of her presence was impossible to ignore. At some point, she reached for the bottle of wine sitting on the coffee table, leaning across me to grab it. Her arm grazed my shoulder, and I felt a jolt, like static electricity sparking through my body. It was such a small thing, so normal, but it caught me off guard. I turned my head just as she did, and suddenly our faces were inches apart. For a second, maybe longer, neither of us moved. Her eyes locked onto mine, and the air between us shifted, thickening in a way that made it hard to breathe. The glow of the TV flickered across her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the way her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to say something. Time seemed to slow. My heart raced in my chest, each beat louder than the last. I tried to laugh it off, desperate to break the tension. "Sorry," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. But then she smiled. Not her usual carefree grin, but something softer, more deliberate. It was a smile that reached her eyes, an intensity there that sent shivers down my spine. "You're acting strange tonight," she teased, her voice light, but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Me? You're the one analyzing me like I'm some kind of puzzle," I shot back, trying to sound casual, though my words felt hollow even to me. Her smile deepened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She just watched me, her gaze lingering in a way that made my skin heat under her scrutiny. And then she leaned closer. The shift was subtle but undeniable, her body angling toward mine, her face now just inches away. I froze, unsure of what to do, unsure if this was actually happening or if my mind was playing tricks on me. When she spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper, carrying a weight that left no room for misinterpretation. "Has anyone ever told you how beautiful you are when you try to avoid things?" Her words hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at her. My breath caught in my throat, my heart thundering so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "I what?" I stammered, my voice barely audible. But her expression didn't change. If anything, her gaze grew more intent, her eyes searching mine as though she were trying to read every thought swirling in my mind. "I mean it," she said softly, her tone so genuine it left no room for doubt. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know if I could respond. My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief, warring with the undeniable flutter of something I couldn't name. She didn't move, didn't pull away, her proximity sending a warmth radiating through me that I couldn't ignore. Her lips quirked into a small, knowing smile, and it was as if she was daring me to say something, to do something, to acknowledge what was happening between us. And yet I couldn't. The silence stretched, heavy and charged, until it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. I could feel her presence, her closeness, the way her words lingered in the air like a challenge. "Sarah," I finally managed, my voice trailing off as her name hung between us. Her smile softened, and for a moment, I thought she might pull back, might laugh it off like it was nothing. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed where she was, her eyes locked on mine, her expression unwavering. "Tell me I'm wrong," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something. Anything, but no words came. Because deep down, I knew I couldn't. She wasn't wrong, and the way she was looking at me made it impossible to pretend otherwise. It was as if she'd stripped away every excuse, every denial I'd told myself, leaving me exposed and vulnerable in a way I wasn't prepared for. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't let myself acknowledge before. This was more than friendship. It had always been more. I just hadn't been brave enough to see it. I tried to laugh, to deflect, to say anything that might lighten the tension thickening the air between us. But my laugh came out shaky, forced, and it only made the moment feel heavier. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be, barely more than a whisper. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. Her gaze stayed locked on mine, unwavering and impossibly steady. Then her hand moved, brushing lightly against mine. The warmth of her touch spread through me, igniting something I wasn't ready to confront. "I'm tired of pretending," she said simply, her tone quiet but firm. Her fingers rested gently over mine, her touch soft yet deliberate. "I always thought you'd see it eventually, but I guess I'll have to spell it out for you." Her words sent a ripple through me, a wave of disbelief and something else, something deeper, sharper, and far more terrifying. I couldn't look away. Her eyes were searching mine, a blend of confidence and vulnerability that completely unraveled me. "I don't understand," I murmured, trying to make sense of the storm of emotions building inside me. "We're friends." Her lips quirked into a small, bittersweet smile. "Yeah," she said, her voice soft. "But it's never been just that for me." My breath caught in my throat, the weight of her confession settling over me like a heavy blanket. The room felt smaller, the space between us impossibly close. The silence stretched, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. I tried to form a coherent thought, to find the right thing to say, but nothing came. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and denial, tangled with an undeniable pull I couldn't ignore. She didn't press me. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything, holding a quiet patience, a willingness to wait as long as it took for me to process what she'd just revealed. And then, without thinking, without planning, I leaned in. The moment my lips touched hers, it was like striking a match. A spark ignited, sharp and immediate, and suddenly, everything I'd buried, everything I'd tried to ignore, came rushing to the surface all at once. Her lips were soft, warm, and the way she responded, hesitant at first, then surging with a confidence that left me breathless, only pulled me further into her. It wasn't just a kiss. It was years of unsaid things, of quiet glances and fleeting touches that I'd convinced myself didn't mean anything. It was the culmination of every moment I'd spent wondering what it was about her that made me feel so alive, and why I was so desperate to keep that feeling hidden. Her hand moved to my face, her thumb brushing gently against my cheek as the kiss deepened. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat louder than the last, drowning out every thought except for her. When we finally pulled back, both of us were breathless, our foreheads nearly touching as we stayed impossibly close. I opened my eyes to find her looking at me, her expression a mix of surprise and something far more intense. "Wow," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of everything we'd just done. I didn't know what to say. Words felt useless, incapable of capturing the storm of emotions swirling inside me. All I could do was stare at her, my heart racing, my body still buzzing from the electricity of the kiss. "Tell me that didn't feel right," she said softly, her tone full of quiet challenge. I couldn't lie, couldn't deny the truth staring me in the face. Instead, I reached for her again, pulling her into another kiss, more urgent this time, more desperate. It was as if I'd been holding my breath for years, and now, finally, I could breathe again. There was no going back from this moment, and for the first time, I didn't want to. When we finally pulled away, Both of us were breathless, our faces mere inches apart. The room was silent except for the soft sound of our breathing, and the weight of what had just happened settled over me like a warm blanket. The silence wasn't awkward. It wasn't filled with doubt or hesitation. Instead, it felt like it carried promises, unspoken and unformed, but they're all the same. Sarah's eyes searched mine, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. And then that familiar, carefree smile tugged at her lips, the one that always seemed to say she knew something I didn't. "I knew you felt something," she said, her voice light but laced with certainty. I wanted to deny it, to find some way to hold on to the safe boundaries of what we had before, but I couldn't. Not after what had just happened. Not after the way she'd made me feel. "I don't even know what I'm feeling," I admitted, my voice trembling. My thoughts were a tangled mess, but there was one thing I was sure of. "But I know I don't want this to end." Her smile widened, and without hesitation, she reached for my hand, threading her fingers through mine. The warmth of her touch sent a shiver down my spine, and the simple act of holding her hand felt more grounding than anything I could have imagined. "Then it doesn't end," she said, her tone matter of fact, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Her confidence made me smile, a small laugh escaping despite the whirlwind inside me. That was so like her, so assured, so unwavering. She leaned in again, this time slower, softer, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was as much a question as it was an answer. And just like before, I couldn't resist. Before I knew it, we were tangled together, hands exploring, lips finding new places to kiss, the barriers between us falling away piece by piece. I found myself pulling her closer, my fingers fumbling as I helped her remove her shirt, then the rest of her clothes. She did the same, her hands gentle yet insistent. And soon we were bare, nothing between us but the warmth of our skin and the emotions we'd both kept buried for far too long. Every touch, every kiss, felt like uncharted territory, a mix of tenderness and urgency that left me breathless. I'd never felt so exposed and yet so safe at the same time, so completely seen and cherished in a way I didn't even know I needed. It wasn't rushed. We moved slowly, savoring every moment, every whispered word, every stolen glance. It was overwhelming and beautiful, a chaotic blend of emotions and sensations that left me dizzy. When it was over, we lay there together, her hand resting lightly on my waist as our breathing slowly returned to normal. The quiet that filled the room now was different. It wasn't heavy but calm, peaceful. I started, but I couldn't find the words. "Yeah," she replied softly, her voice filled with a warmth that made my chest ache in the best way. I turned to face her, her expression open and relaxed. For the first time, I let myself really look at her, to take in every detail. The softness of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way her hair framed her face like a halo. "This changes everything," I said, my voice barely audible. "It does," she agreed, her fingers tracing small, absent patterns on my arm. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know what this meant for us, or how we'd navigate the shift from friends to whatever this was. But as I lay there beside her, feeling her warmth against me, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to go back. Sarah had crossed a line I hadn't even realized was there. And now that she had, I couldn't imagine my life without her on the other side of it. And honestly, I didn't want to.